Hello everyone. Today we will be talking about the American Constitution. And if you remember last class, after the Revolutionary War, the United States gets independence and they're trying to figure out how they're going to start their government. Well, they come up with the Articles of Confederation, however it did not work. And there are three reasons why it did not work, and those are the inability to collect taxes. Taxes, while people don't like them usually, are crucial for government to work. If there's no taxes, there's no police, there's no military, there's no schools, there's no roads. Essentially, a government cannot run unless it has money. In the Articles of Confederation, there was an inability to collect taxes, so it didn't work. There was a lack of executive central government to enforce the laws, so that kind of has to go down to money. If somebody breaks the law, you need to arrest them, there has to be a punishment. However, that costs money, so there was no way to enforce the laws. And there was an inability to regulate trade. States can just do whatever they wanted. They traded with any country, they traded with other states. There was no way to regulate trade. So these are reasons why the Articles of Confederation did not work. So the colonists, they get back together, they create something called the Constitution, which is the law of the land. The Constitution is simply, it's the law for the whole country. So everything that's in the Constitution is the law, whether you're in California or North Dakota or Georgia or North Carolina or Virginia or New York or Texas. It's the law for the whole country. That said, states are still able to govern themselves as long as it does not violate the Constitution. So states can make any law they want, but they cannot go against a law that's in the Constitution. So if the Constitution says you have to give everybody freedom of speech, a state cannot make a law saying that there is no freedom of speech. That would be unconstitutional. So states can make laws, but only if it agrees with the Constitution. And the only power the federal government has is the power the Constitution gives it. So one day the president can't wake up and decide, I'm going to arrest people who disagree with me. That can't happen because the Constitution says the president cannot arrest people. So the power the federal government has is what's in the Constitution. If it's not in the Constitution, then the federal government does not have that power. And today we're going to learn about the Great Compromise. And this was, the colonists wanted a balance between state powers and federal powers. If you remember the Articles of Confederation, it gave every state one vote no matter what. So if a state had 50 million people, it only had one vote. If a state had 2 million people, still one vote. With the Great Compromise, they changed that. So essentially, the House of Congress was created. And there's actually two houses in the Congress, and one house, which is the Senate, was created, which gave the states equal representation. So every state had 2 senators. California has 2 senators. Virginia has 2 senators. Nebraska, 2 senators. Michigan, 2 senators. Doesn't matter what state it is, it's equal. Every state has 2 senators. But there's also another house called the House of Representatives. And this was created, which each state is given representation based on the state's population. So higher population meant more representatives. So California has 50 million people. They have the most representatives. They might have 30 representatives. Maybe North Dakota or Wyoming have 600,000 people. They're only going to have one representative. So essentially it's one house. Every state is given 2 senators regardless of size. And the other house is given representation based on population. So higher population, more representatives. There was also something that came up called the 3/5 Compromise. And southern states wanted slaves to count towards the population. Because remember, more population meant you had more representatives. But northern states did not want them to count towards population totals. And it was decided that each state would count slaves as a 3/5 person instead of a full person. So if there was a slave, they weren't considered one person. They were considered 3/5 of a person. And the 3/5 Compromise was created to address the concern of southern states. Another important part of the Constitution was separation of powers. And in order to avoid a central government that was too strong, 3 equal branches of government were created. Which the United States, we have 3 branches. We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, judicial branch. And you have to remember that colonists did not want a central government that was too strong. England had a central government that was too strong, so they did not want that. And there is a separation of powers, so no one branch is stronger than the others. All the branches are equal in power. So legislative, executive, judicial, these are all equal. And there is numerous checks and balances. And what that means is one branch can stop the other branch from doing something. So for example, if the legislative branch creates a law, the executive branch, if they don't like that law, they can get rid of it. And then if legislative and executive both like a law, the judicial branch, if they don't think it's a good law or it's against the Constitution, they can get rid of it. So each branch depends on the other, but they can also stop another branch from doing something. And all of this is taking place at what's called the Constitutional Convention. And this was a meeting that took place from 1787 to 1789, where all the colonies got together and created the Constitution. Remember, the Revolutionary War ended in 1781, so it took 8 years to figure out what type of government we wanted. And at the convention, George Washington was the president of the convention. He wasn't president of the country, but he was just president of the convention. He actually didn't even do very much there. He just kind of hung out, he talked to people, but he didn't really help make anything. But he was the president of the convention. James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution, and he was often involved in debates, and he kept notes of the convention. So a lot of historians, when they go back and try to find out what happened, they look at his notes because he took a lot of notes. And if you remember from last class, he authored the Virginia Plan, which came up with the idea of 3 separate but equal branches of government. So he was the one that came up with having legislative, executive, and judicial. And who influenced the Constitution? George Mason. He was responsible for the addition of the Bill of Rights. And James Madison, he wrote the Virginia Plan, which influenced the 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. He was the one that had that idea of separation of power. And the Articles of Confederation, while they didn't work, were similar to the Constitution. And they are similar because they both attempted to create a federal government to balance state and national powers, and they both gave reserve powers to the states. So once again, that just means states can make any law that the federal government has not made. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Go ahead and go on to the next part.